Hey, what is up guys, JTX here, bringing the anticipated League Start Bleed Bow build. Now, before I go into the build, I'm going to have timestamps for the different sections that people can jump to throughout the video, so if you're just interested about the gems, or even interested about the passive tree or the gear, you can jump to the corresponding section in the video. I'll be including a path of building with all the comprehensive details that you need to know, so if you don't want to watch the video, you can just take the PoB, and the instructions should be pretty clear inside that. We'll have all the information you need to get your league start going, as well as some gearing options. Now, noting all of that, what is Bleed Bow? Bleed Bow is a projectile-based attack skill build that focuses on dealing damage over time to enemies and letting the enemies slowly tick down, while your playstyle is just to kite around and stay alive. Now, there's a lot of advantages to this build because a lot of the times you're going to be constantly doing damage to enemies, so it's a lot safer for you to just focus on your dodging compared to some other builds. Some of the downsides are that your damage is not instant, so there are times where you have to wait for your damage to kick in. So sometimes it's like kind of a balance, but when you get to enough DPS towards the end game, it feels really, really nice because you can just pop one puncture and then you're pretty much chilling. In 3.22, the major change to the 3.21 version is we don't have Crucible mods anymore. So that means we can't use the overpowered Rain of Arrows tech, where we had 300% more damage on our Rain of Arrows. So for the end game now, we're using Split Arrow instead. And we also got some new cool gems coming in. Mainly, we're going to be looking at the Sadism Gem. Now that's a new gem that makes your damaging elements deal the damage faster, but they also reduce the duration of the elements. So you won't be using this gem for your damage blink like Puncture, because it does reduce the total DPS, but you will use it for your clearing skill on Split Arrow, because it front loads your damage, so your damage actually kicks in a lot faster. And most of the time, you don't really care about the total DPS on your clearing skill, because you're trying to clear it as fast as possible. So having that Sadism Support actually is a really, really powerful multiplier for your clearing. In terms of the new Volatility Support Gem, people have also asked whether that would be relevant for the Bleed Bow build. From what I can gather, it functions similarly to how Reslatha's works. It increases your minimum/maximum roll ranges. I'm not sure if it's going to be as good as actually just a generic damage support gem like Deadly Elements or Vicious Proj. Probably require testing, but at this stage, I don't think it belongs in either the clearing setup or the puncture setup, mainly because you are running Reslatha's already. That belt already does a lot of work for the build. You could alternatively run the gem if you don't want to run Reslatha's. I can see that being a possibility if Reflect opens up the options for your belt slot. But other than that, I don't think the Volatility Gem does much for the build. I'll go into the build here. So this is the path of building. We start in Act 1 with Split Arrow, with chance to bleed and pierce. And as soon as we get Rain of Arrows, we're going to be using this skill all the way until Act 8, roughly, when we get our Bleed Explosion. So the reason why we use Rain of Arrows instead of Split Arrow is Rain of Arrows has a bunch of inbuilt mechanics that just make it superior to Split Arrow until we do get that Bleed Explosions. You don't have to run like Pierce or Chain or any sort of clearing skill with Rain of Arrows, and also you don't have to really aim with Rain of Arrows. You can just dump it onto the pack of mobs and don't think about it. Split Arrow is kind of finicky because you have to aim, and you also kind of have to have have a Pierce support to make it actually clear well. So I definitely recommend using Rain of Arrows all the way up till Act 8 until you get your Ascendancy to give you your Bleed Explosions. After Act 8, we're running Split Arrow with Brutality, Chain, all that good stuff, and Cruelty, and Sadism. So that's kind of like the general setup. So you're going to be using Rain of Arrows for most of the leveling, and then switching to Split Arrow when you get to maps. So for your actual puncture setup, there's not much change in the damage/gem links compared to Crucible League. We're still using the same gem links itself, and the damage itself has been nerfed a little bit because there was a bug in how Path of Exile was calculating the snipe stages versus how it was amping the damage. So we're losing around maybe 9% of our top end damage, but it shouldn't really matter towards the end because my old build capped out about 50 million bleed DPS, and the DOT cap's about 35. So you'll be sitting golden anyway. Like Puncture with Snipe has more than enough damage to do all the end game content. And also this league, we do have access to tattoos, so I think there's definitely some potential there with using some certain tattoo combinations, especially the increased mana reservation efficiency tattoos. Those seem to be really, really powerful for the build because we are reserving a lot of auras. Those will really help out with gearing slash ramping up towards the end game, because we don't have to get so much like armor on our gear. In terms of actually leveling the build, I went through how you're meant to use your clear skill. You'll also be running a couple of auras throughout the act, so you pick up Herald of Purity in Act 2, and then Pride and Warbanner in Act 3. You don't run Flesh and Stone initially until you actually get your Arena Challenger, which is your third lab. For newer players, labs are just trials that you have to do with your character to ascend your character to actually make them into the class that you want to play. For in this case, we're playing Gladiator, right? In the order of ascendancies, what you want to do is you want to get Blood in the Eyes, Gratuitous Violence, Arena Challenger, and then Outmatch and Outlast as your final ascendancy. In terms of utility skills, you're just running Blink Arrow and Dash for your mobility. Dash is something I personally use. I've used it for a long time, so I've gotten used to it. The other options are Flame Dash or Frostblink. Those are both valid options if you want to go down that route. Frostblink is actually really good for this build because it lets you hold your puncture / snipe channel, and you can Frostblink around the place and still shoot it. So normally other skills, you cancel your channel if you use that mobility skill. So something to think about depending on what your playstyle is. Also in Act 1, you grab a Shrapnel Ballista with Cans to Bleed if you have the gem links for it. I like having a Shrapnel Ballista just for the extra single target early on because it does feel a little bit slow at the beginning until you start getting your gem setups and your more links into your gear. So in Act 2, we get one of the most powerful gems for the build, which is Ensnaring Arrow. Ensnaring Arrow makes it that enemies count as if they're moving. And if they're moving, Bleed does I think a 300% more multiplier to the damage, so it's an insane damage boost for our single target for puncture. So having the Ensnaring Arrow with a Ballista Totem setup, you'll be able to do a puncture on most bosses and just absolutely shred it. You'll see in the footage behind me as well that my character on SSF gear is just absolutely tearing apart the Act bosses, so I think you guys will be really fine for damage. In Act 3, we get to our tech, so this is the Manaforged Arrow Support tech. This is where you attach Frenzy and Ensnaring Arrow to a Manaforged support, which means it automates all of your skills, so you don't have to worry about putting totems down or applying it yourself. It'll automatically trigger based on how much mana you spend. So that's a really powerful tech for most bow builds now, that you'll have a Manaforged Arrow support to give you free Frenzy, and in our case also Ensnaring Arrow. Actually, a quick point here as well. For your Manaforged Arrow support, you actually get this in Act 4. So this is actually not accurate here. You get this in Act 4 from the library. Or alternatively, if you have someone playing a ranger in your party, or you can ask level chat, you can get that in Act 3 if someone trades it to you. But yeah, so it should be Act 4 you do the library to get the Manaforged Arrow support. So Act 3 or Act 4, you start automating your setup. Once you get to early maps, you're going to try to run a Determination. The reason why is because you're going to realize that your build's going to be really fast and really good at clearing. But then when you slowly shift from yellow to red maps, you're going to have to get some defenses. So this is where we pop in a Determination. And if you have to drop your Herald of Purity or Warbanner or both, then definitely do it just to fit in a Determination. At this point, you're also going to be getting more and more gear. So your priority is just to make sure that your resistances are capped first. And then you're going to go for the Suppress swap. So you swap your gear into getting 100% suppression. And then you start getting some more reduced, increased mana reservation efficiency. That's when you can start to slot in more and more auras. Now, we'll go quickly to the tree here. I've included a leveling tree all the way up to endgame. And this video does share some crossover with my original build, which talks about the hyper endgame when you swap to a champion. So this build kind of covers up to that point and kind of like crosses over just a little bit. But if you do really want to see the endgame version of the build with champion and like all the nice forbidden flesh, watches, like all the good stuff, please check out that video. That video is still very relevant. The only difference is you're using split arrow instead of rain of arrows now. So quickly to go over the tree, you'll have each stage of leveling from all the way up to your initial endgame. You do want to run a life/mana leech node early. You can eventually put this onto your jewelry/accessories and then get your minus mana cost gear, but this helps a lot in the early game. Just a quick call out if you're wondering if your mana is feeling not too great, that's what you want. So this is the tree you're looking at after you get to maps / early maps like yellow maps. And then when you have enough currency farmed up, you should be making a swap to get 100% spell suppression. Spell suppression is really important for the build. Let me swap my gear here. So I've also included different gear sets. this initial gear set is just the gear I finished SSF with, like finished Act 10 with, really like crappy gear. And then you'll eventually start building up more and more better gear until you do make a swap to your suppressed gear, and ultimately your cluster gear swap at the end. So there's going to be sets of gear that you guys can compare yourself to. I think in particular, you'll be interested in the early mapping gear, so like day 1, day 2 gear. For the gear I've included, one of the options for body armor is a lionized vision as your chest piece, because it adds a pierce support into your setup. So it can give you a quick pseudo 6-link / 7-link, and it's really powerful with Split Arrow, because Split Arrow does need a utility gem to get its clear. So either normally you run a chain or a pierce. So if you run a lionized vision, it gives you a free pierce. So it lets you run 6 damage gems plus the pierce from the actual chest piece. So that's also an option for your chest piece if you do want to run that early game. Also, I've included that you can run an Assailant if you want. The damage with an Assailant versus a 6-link snipe setup is about the same. I think they're very close in terms of damage. So obviously, I always prefer having a proper 6-stage snipe. I'm not a big fan of the 8-stage snipe, but obviously this is player preference. So if you guys want Assailant, definitely a choice as well. And obviously, you'll be wanting to run the Veslathas always in the build. Veslathas is pretty much best in slot. If you can grab one of these early, great. Day 1, day 2, they might be a bit expensive, but it adds a lot of power to your build. Some of the uniques might be a bit harder to get. Maybe the weapons might be harder to get this league. If a lot of people see this video, that's just a disclaimer. The gear itself depends on how many people are playing it. But in general, getting the items isn't too bad at league start, especially if you're on Trade League. If you're on SSF, just make sure you keep upgrading your bow and capping out your gear. Making sure you have enough defenses is really important for the build, because you can keep doing damage, but if you don't have enough defense, then you're going to have a bad time in maps. I'll talk a little bit about the actual mechanics of bleed now, and how in Path of Building's new update, there's a couple little settings you can check to see how much bleed potential you actually have. So if you go to your snipe / puncture setup, you're going to have something called like your attack rate, which is how fast you attack. And then if you go to your calcs page here, and then we pick puncture, here we go. So you can see in the bleed section here, you have something called a stack potential. So what a stack potential means is this is the number of times you can hit before your first bleed runs out. So I can hit 4.3 times before my first puncture stack runs out. And this number here represents how much total damage you're going to kind of roll for your bleed. So if 100% is your max roll for your bleed hit, and then let's say like 1% is like the minimum roll you can get, this is the number that tells you how much damage on average you're going to be doing with your bleed. So in this case, puncture. The higher your attack speed, the more times you can potentially fish for higher bleeds and potentially increase your damage. So bleed fishing is pretty much when you do hit an enemy with a bleed, the game will roll a value, and that will be the power of your bleed you hit on an enemy. Only the most powerful bleed saved on an enemy. So if you hit the enemy again with a weaker bleed, it won't matter, because your more powerful bleed is still overriding it. But if you hit an even stronger bleed on your opponent, it'll refresh the bleed and then apply a stronger bleed. That's kind of a new feature in PoB, so you kind of can see how many times you can potentially stack a bleed on an enemy before your first bleed runs out, and also how much damage you're going to be doing on your bleed. In terms of PoB DPS / defense, with your early game setup, so with just your early mapping gear and also your early mapping tree, so I'll just set all these settings here, you're looking at a respectable 3.3 to 3.4 million DOT DPS. This is also with Pride Aura at initial effect. You can take it to maximum, you get 4 million. This is with a very basic gear and a very basic tree. I think that's that's more than enough to get you into the end game, as well as into your early bosses / watchstones. As you scale the gear up, your damage will ramp up really aggressively. If you look at Split Arrow, we're sitting at about, I'll add in the Shadow as a multiplier, so we're sitting at about 500,000 clear damage for our Split Arrow. This could be even higher if you are running a lionized vision. So instead of running chain, you run run Deadly Elements and you give it a chain, sitting at maybe 700k. So I think that's very respectable damage, especially for League starter gear. In terms of your actual defenses itself, you have about a 20k hit pool initially going into maps. You got about 5k life, ideally, on your gear. Also, if you start running Determination, you drop your Herald of Purity. Yeah, gives you about 14k armor. Effective hit pool increases a little bit as well. So this is also not including like VMS. So yeah, I think you have like a decent amount of tankiness going into white, yellow, early red maps. And as you get your suppressed gear together and make the gear swap, your tankiness will jump up another stage, and your damage will jump up another stage as you get progressed through your gear. Just to go quickly through configs as well, just to make sure your configs are ticked correctly. This modifier is just here to represent sadism, so don't need to have this here. Your snipe stages will be 6 or 8, depending if you do have an assailant. For accurate boss DPS, you should be in blood stance. You should have frenzy charges ticked because you have your Manaforged setup generating you frenzies. You should have your challenger charges ticked because of your ascendancy. If you're on blood stance, you'll be generating them hitting a unique monster / boss. And you have your ensnare stacks ticked at 1, or your enemy counting as bleeding. Both of these just mean that the enemy's taking the bleeding multiplier damage for moving. So it's really, really important that's ticked. That'll jump your damage up to the actual amount. And also emphasizes why it's so important to have an ensnaring arrow in your setup for bosses that don't really move. I'll quickly also cover the cluster setup as well. I do go over it slightly in my original video, but when you do switch to your suppressed gear and you have enough currency to start picking up some cluster jewels and some better gear, you're just looking for a jewel with battle hardened and mastered fundamentals. You need to get a third notable just so you can force it. You can force the parting of the cluster jewel, so you can have 2 points. This third notable doesn't really matter because we're not allocating it at all, so it doesn't have to be force multiplier. It can be something else, but we just want battle hardened and master the fundamentals with a third notable. Mediums are still the same. You're running Student of Decay and Wasting Affliction, so this gives a bit of chaos res, and this gives a bit of damage. And we're also running Mortifying Aspect on our Mana Reservation jewel. This just lets us reserve Malevolence, and also as we start picking up like our mana gear like Enlighten or an Owl's Uprising, it really helps let us reserve a lot of auras and makes the build really, 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 it starts ramping the build up a crazy amount. Also, you can also grab a Watcher's Eye with DOT multi, you affect my Malevolence, physical damage, all physical damage while using Pride. You don't have to get both of these rolls. It's pretty expensive. You can get one or the other with like another roll that helps, like maybe something with Determination armor or block chance. Just pretty much try and get something with an extra roll if you can. If not, that's fine as well. Having a single roll is plenty of damage as well. In terms of actual other gearing for the build, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to be focusing on getting a higher and higher Fizbo for your build, and then you're going to just be getting generic, Resistance's Life on your gear. When you do start pushing towards the end game, you're going to be looking for gear that adds more damage to your build. Easiest ways you can get that damage is you can get it through Eldritch mods, so you can get DOT multi on your gloves, and you can also get Bleeds deal damage faster on your boots. Those are both pretty common ones to get on your gloves / boots. And then you're also beginning to roll for more DOT multi on your quiver / your gloves, or and then getting double rolls on your jewels. So that's kind of how you slowly increase the damage on the build. It's a pretty, I think it's a pretty self-explanatory build. You're just going to be constantly trying to upgrade your weapon. You're trying to look for as much physical DPS as possible, and then adding a Fizz dot overtime multiplier yourself with the crafting bench. And then you're going to be slowly upgrading your gear until you can make the swap to suppress. When you swap to suppress gear, it makes your build a lot more tanky. I would definitely recommend getting to this point of gear before you start taking on some of the harder bosses like Maven, Exarch, and Eda. They're pretty straightforward. You don't really need crazy gear to beat them, especially for the first run. Maybe Uber, you might need some suppress, but initially, I think the build's damage plus playstyle is enough to get you your Watchstones very, very, very comfortably. The only other note that I really have is chain versus split. So if you are running a Lionize vision early on, you're not going to be running chain, right? So you can have an extra damage link. When you do have enough damage on your split arrow, I do think chain is a better utility gem / clearing gem because it lets you ricochet your split arrows backwards and forwards. It's got a lot more spread than just pierce. So when you do have enough damage on your split arrow, I do recommend switching to a Lionized Vision. Obviously, we're going to see how Sadism Support works as well. I feel like it could be a really, really powerful support gem that lets you really front load the damage. And obviously, I'll be trying out different setups and different combos with this character as well. You guys can follow me on twitch.tv/JTX. I'll be streaming my league start with this character, so you can follow along. If any questions you get stuck on the build, just feel free to ask a question in the chat, and I'll try to help you out where I can. This video plus my original video should cover pretty much most of the mechanics for Bleed. I've added a lot of notes here, so if you do get stuck on anything, please let me know. These notes kind of guide you to what gem setup you want, and then the gear itself is the references inside the items in PoB. So I think you guys will have a good time playing this build, and I definitely recommend it playing it myself. So obviously throughout the video, you probably have seen footage of me actually seeing some of the gameplay. So this is all in SSF. So I was doing a character run from Act 1 to 10. Felt really, really smooth the whole way through. The only times that I did die was because I got greedy trying to go for a really big snipe, or I played a little bit stupid. Pretty much player error. I think the build itself won't hold you back. I think it'll just be the player at that point. If you guys do have any comments, or if you like the video, please subscribe. I really appreciate you guys getting me to 1,000 subscribers. We'll have more content coming out in the next couple of days and after League starts. So really do appreciate the support, and I will see you guys in the next video.